Listen, guys, it's a bit embarrassing to say, but I am a massive, overly massive fan of RPG Maker.
想像力は無限大テロップ機能もついて全てがスケールアップ世界で一つの RPG が作れる RPG ツクール2ツクールシリーズ続々登場
I only say it's embarrassing because there's this weird part of me that feels like I'm a fake fan, even though I've been in the game since about VX released back in 2008. Did you know that RPG Maker has been around for a very long time? I'll admit, looking up information was hard because typing RPG Maker into Google just brings up the most recent PC title, that being MZ, so forgive me if everything I say in this video is a bit wrong. Wikipedia isn't perfect, but it's got most of what I needed to say. RPG Maker, as we know it today, started on the MSX2 of all things, which you might know for being the original console for Metal Gear if you're a super nerd watching a video about RPG Maker. Granted, the first title with RPG in the name is called RPG Construction Tool, Dante, which is hilarious if your roommate is named that. The first title to really be called RPG Maker, or in the native language, RPG Tsukuru, would come in 1992 by the name of RPG Tsukuru Dante, 98. Don't get your hopes up, we're not going to get great names for a little bit. Though, fun fact, this isn't the script. I learned that Tsukuru in RPG Tsukuru is actually supposed to be a portmanteau of the word make and tool in Japanese. And, oh, that's lovely, isn't it? Looking at this title, you can see at a glance, if you're a super nerd watching a video about RPG Maker, that there's nothing but Dragon Quest influence here. That is far from a bad thing. If you think about old school RPGs, you think of Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, and that's fantastic. I haven't really played much of those early titles, except for Final Fantasy I, which has a special place in my heart, but I can see the writing on the wall. Dragon Quest is huge in Japan. It's no wonder why people would want to make something just like it. But let's skip forward a few years. The first time an RPG Maker game would truly be numbered would be the first title on the Super Famicom and Satellaview, RPG Tsukuru Super Dante, which released in March of 1995. Listen, say what you want about the accent, but like, I'm not gonna say RPG Tsukuru Super Dante. It feels weird. This is what many would consider RPG Maker 1, which would be followed by RPG Tsukuru 2, also releasing the Super Famicom and Satellaview barely under a year later in 1996. 2 days after my literal birthday, we would get the first Windows release by ASCII, that being RPG Tsukuru 95. This is huge because if you guys know anything about RPG Maker today, it's almost exclusively built for Windows PCs. We wouldn't have a native Mac or Linux distribution until 2015, which we're a ways out from, so sit tight, we're getting there. Following the release of RPG Tsukuru 95, we get the big one. The one that made it a niche game developing icon in English-speaking territories. And by that, I mean North America because Wikipedia isn't inclusive to places like the UK or Australia, RPG Tsukuru 3. Or as we would know it, RPG Maker. Just RPG Maker for the PlayStation 1. Holy hell, this box art is iconic. Forget the fact that it's totally unlike anything you'd actually get in-game, or that the chair says DM like this kid's directing a movie, or really, a game of Dungeons & Dragons. No, this shit is cool. I can't put my finger on what this makes me think of besides listening to Slayer on a Walkman, popping into an arcade, and dumping quarters into a Dragon Slayer cabinet before meeting up with your dad to go see Back to the Future for the first time because he has a VHS and it's movie night. It's like looking into the face of everything that inspired Thundercats and Black Sabbath and putting it onto the comfiest fur blanket that your Asian friend's mom put on you because you guys are having a sleepover and you looked cold, and your friend just got a copy of Mario Kart 64 the week before and you had the time of your life filling your bellies with pizza and Mountain Dew before passing the fuck out. Holy shit, that is such a long sentence. Why did I fucking write that? Whoops, I got a new microphone in the middle of this video's production. Sorry about the change in quality. This cover is raw as fuck, if you're in need of Subway Surfers gameplay on the screen to even understand what I'm saying. What else do you kids say? Skibbity Sigma, it has aura. I don't know, take a shower and go outside. Hit your best friend with the red dodgeball with that killer sound. Oh yeah, the point is, I think that this slaps. I think it slaps so hard, and this was the first time that North America really was able to get its hands on something as cool as making your own RPG. I feel like October 2000 was a weird time to release it, but that's besides the point. RPG Maker was here, and we would soon see another English release in the form of RPG Maker 2. I vividly remember living up in Washington State and going to this place called Trade-A-Game in the inner city. It was like my favorite store and instilled a lifelong love of locally owned brick-and-mortar game shops. I remember seeing it on the shelves, but it wasn't in the cards at the time, and this was after I had known about the series for a while, again thanks to my knowledge of VX and XP at that point in time. Future Sonata here. I learned, like, as I was editing this video that the place was closed down. It actually hit me like a truck because I haven't been back to what I'd still consider my hometown since I was like 14 years old, and this makes me incredibly sad. I hope that Steve and his family are still doing great. I'm genuinely sad to have lost a store like that, and it always felt like to me that it'd be there like forever, but COVID definitely changed some things. Hey, Steve, if you're watching this, you inspired a young Sonata in your own way. And I wouldn't be the same if it weren't for the culture I grew up in. And that included your store. Thank you. It released in 2003, and it was almost a bit like Final Fantasy VII, what with having deformed character models in the overworld, but having more proportionate models in the battle scene. It's cool as hell. The only downside is that it's kind of hella complicated. I never got the chance to play it or even touch the case, but looking things up online is like looking into a mess of conditions and such. Making a building with textures and blocks, it's like Hytale before Hytale, or Minecraft, whatever the hell you're into. This was on the PlayStation 2, and kids around the world were given almost unfettered access to something that was possibly as esoteric and hard to read as it could be. I have over 1,000 hours in RPG Maker as a whole, and I can barely read what's going on screen here. But I think that says a lot about the trust put into RPG Maker and their core audience. Which isn't to say that it's been lost over the years. I'd hazard that RPG Maker MV and MZ are just as capable, if not more so, of being as complex as this. Hell, learning about how to use variables like map X and Y positions in MV was like unlocking my third eye, but still. I wonder how big a game could get in the console versions of these games. Like, does it get to the file sizes like Tokimeki Memorial? Yeah, I know my stuff, what of it? This is all to say that RPG Maker 2? It's pretty based. Complex, but based. What we're generally aiming for is something easier to use, to help people get into making their own games and eventually build up confidence to try out something more complex. Which brings me to RPG Maker 3. RPG Maker 3 was the first time I ever saw RPG Maker being mentioned. Releasing in 2005 for the PlayStation 2, you know that young Sonata was looking up everything he could about the game just to learn more about what it could do. I don't remember the year I was doing it, but there was a deep fascination for me having just come off of playing Final Fantasy X-2 and Suikoden 3. Yeah, I started off with big guns, and look at me now. I play shit-ass games like Final Fantasy XIV. I can't really describe what goes on in my head when I see this. It's quaint, it's simple, it's got everything you need. These menus are tasty, the camera angles make me want to cry, the fact that it's on the PS2 was everything I could have ever wanted as a kid. It's not going to do you the most good, but if you wanted to make something dumb for you and your friends to play back in the day and come back 2 years later and wonder how you pulled it off, you've come to the right place. RPG Maker, at its core, inspired so many people to get into game development, and they have stuck to it. RPG Maker is one of the greatest inventions of the digital ages, and I would be a lesser creative person if I didn't have it. But we're not done talking about RPG Maker, since this was the last console version to ever come out. We need to rewind a bit back to the year 2000. RPG Maker 2000 and 2003 are basically the same engine, but with some slight updates that make 2003 a better experience overall. Considering the kind of people that watch my videos, I know you know of a game made in RPG Maker 2003, and it's Yume Nikki. Or Off, I see you guys too. Stop telling me to play Off. A lot of beloved old school indie horror games were made in RPG Maker, whether you want to believe it or not. Yume Nikki has made waves throughout its community, and it was all done on RPG Maker 2003. And that says volumes about the creativity you can instill into these games and make something that lasts a lifetime, in the collective memories of the players. I used 2003 for a little bit when I was younger, and I can confirm that despite the theoretical limitations, it's got a lot of soul even in just the basic model. I can't recommend it enough if you want to get a taste of what RPG Maker can do, but you have to manage your expectations. It's not going to be the ultimate program, but it's going to get you thinking about timing, events, all that stuff. I think one thing that's really cool is that the stock battle system is an ATB, or Active Time Battle System. If you're a Final Fantasy nerd, you'd understand that this was a style of battle that those games popularized, and after 2003, this system was deleted from stock versions of RPG Maker for 17 years. It's a bit confusing to navigate the database, but lord, I'd love to sit down and make a game in 2003 one of these days. Hey, if you'll let me, I'd love to turn that into a challenge video, get some friends involved, and release it to the public. For free, of course. There's actually this love letter video to 2003 that I personally haven't watched, but seeing what other people are willing to do in order to keep using the program, I totally understand. Now I'm going to take you 4 days before RPG Maker 3 for the PS2 came out. It's September 16th of 2005. And for North America, we got RPG Maker XP for Windows XP computers. This was my RPG Maker. This is what I grew up wanting to play so bad. I remember vividly looking into how to pirate it and somehow getting things to work out in the end. I remember sitting down and making and deleting project after project, trying to get certain things to be the way that I wanted. And if I had all these old projects, I'd show you, but I lost all of my possessions in a terrible event I don't like thinking about if I can help it. I cannot begin to tell you how accessible RPG Maker XP felt to me. How I learned to put battles together, make icons for certain weapons, make a game that was truly something for me. I love RPG Maker XP, and you will too. RPG Maker XP is the engine that really makes you want to learn games, because there are people to this day that are actively distributing tools for XP to make certain kinds of games. Considering I have a tiny platform, I could mention what it is, but I'm not going to out of consideration of I don't want the project to get shut down because it means a lot to me even if I've never engaged with it. To be fair, it uses a language not many people use, that being Ruby, but it's still incredibly cool to know that there are people who decided to learn it and make things for other people to make cool games with. I remember the first script I ever injected. If I can find it, I'll put it on screen. It was one that changed the standard menu into one based on Final Fantasy IX, which I hadn't played at the time. I have since fixed that glaring issue in my life, and can you guess what my favorite title is? It's not 14, I'll tell you that much. The things I did with this engine. The things I wanted to do with this engine. I have so many fond memories of it, and yet I never completed a project. I remember getting up to Project 64 and thinking that was funny because that was my N64 emulator at the time. I had a childhood for sure. There's so many quirky things in this engine that are probably in older versions, but this one takes it. Icons are individually set up and not in a large sheet. There were multiple versions of every character class, so you could do so much. The way this database looks is so Windows XP, it hurts. I love it to death. I wouldn't trade it for the world. I like how much is laid out for you to actually just pick up and play with, what they leave in and leave out, how much you actually have to change to make it playable and all. There's a lot of good about XP, even in its 2005 form. The next one to come after that was actually the first RPG Maker I ever saw and really wanted to get into, though it's not one really looked back on fondly. RPG Maker VX, just VX, came out 2 years after XP, and it certainly was. There were a couple of notable downsides to VX as opposed to XP, a couple of which being removed features. I don't actually have much experience on this matter despite this being how I was introduced to the series, but I did look things up and... oh, I lost my phone. Oh, it's on the floor. One of the big downgrades is that battles no longer had dedicated backgrounds, unlike XP, and now just created a radial blurred background of the map you're on. The mapping system was a notorious downgrade, no longer featuring separate layers that you cycled between, but having things be automatic, which is something that didn't get fixed until 2020. Yes, I'm serious. Hi there, Future Sonata here. During editing, I bought RPG Maker VX while it was on sale, and it was on sale. It was like $4, whatever. And I decided to take a look at it, and oh my god, it's worse. You know how I said there's not many tile sets? Try one. There's one tile set for the entire system unless you make your own, which you then have to replace in the game files. Oh god. The point is that between RPG Maker XP and VX, a lot of people, myself included, really wanted to stick with XP. Despite it coming out only 2 years earlier, by the time I had gotten into it, it was like stepping into a fully formed city with things to do and things to learn. It was incredible. By the time of the next entry, they decided to fix what was actually broken, and they took RPG Maker VX and upgraded to give us what we really deserved. RPG Maker VX Ace came out in 2011, and I have nearly 400 fucking hours in it with no projects to speak of. I am part of the problem that I'm going to describe in a bit. There is such a wide divide between support for VX and support for VX Ace, despite having 4 years between them. A lot of scripts you can find now that aren't totally lost due to servers not being up anymore are for VX Ace specifically. The thing with scripts is that they're highly engine specific. You can't just plug a VX script into a VX Ace project. It's just not going to work. That's why there being so much genuine support for VX Ace really goes to show the testament to making that engine work and how much better it is than VX. Before you mention it, it's not lost on me that saying VX and VX Ace is weird and makes things a bit harder to keep track of, but you're gonna have to forgive me, this is the best we got. I wrote VX Axe in the script. VX Ace was my engine of choice for the longest time before I got to a real-ass upgrade. I love this engine to bits. It's where I first picked up how to really start making events feel as cinematic as I possibly could. One of the major changes to how the stock engine works was something I don't necessarily like, but there's ways around it if you're clever enough. Stats used to be managed per character, so if you had the ability to change their class, their stats wouldn't change. It meant that characters really had to commit to their own class, which is fine I guess, but VX Ace changed that. VX Ace made stats a part of the class themselves, which really meant that if you injected a script that let you change classes, something very popular to add in by the way, their stats changed too. There's a whole host of things that happen when you do things like this. It's really cool. I also started learning about how to actually design encounters because VX Ace made things so easy with the brand new region system. Regions are powerful tools, but the way that it was described back in the day was really stupid. I remember some reviewers saying that you can truly draw with this tool specifically, but maybe I'm misremembering. All that regions do is allow you to create maps with varied encounters based on the actual places you're stepping on. World maps, if you had them, used to run on a global encounter rate for the entire map. I don't know if it was actually advised or not, but I certainly wouldn't have done it. As most RPGs do, you have certain areas that have harder enemies than others, and you couldn't really make that work without having certain scripts in place. That means that you had multiple maps with separate encounter tables, or you forgone the idea of having world map encounters entirely. Now, in Vanilla RPG Maker, you didn't have to make that distinction. Despite this example being a programming oversight, you can now very intentionally create your own peninsula of power, just like in Final Fantasy I on the NES. If you're genuinely looking for a place to start with RPG Maker, one that's powerful in its vanilla limitations, but more modern than other offerings or emulated console games, please give RPG Maker VX Ace a shot. I know that $70 is a bit of a large asking price for a legal release, but when have I ever been shy about the question of legality of the things that I do? I'll leave you to figure that out. Hey, sorry to stop you, but if you're liking the video, it would mean the world to me if you hit that subscribe button. I love making videos, and subscribing is the best way to keep up with me. Commenting and liking the video also means a lot. I can't tell you how much it means to me. If you get this far, write a comment saying Panda Express Orange Chicken anywhere in there. Thanks. Love y'all. In 2015, RPG Maker MV came out, and it revolutionized the game. Say what you want about programming languages, but there were a few restrictions in place that simultaneously made the last three engines better and worse. One of the great things was that, if you understood Ruby on a fundamental level, you could mess with code used for important parts of the game. If you weren't, though, and just downloaded scripts like I did off the internet, you had to be very specific about how things were placed and when and why and how things were implemented. Sometimes you had to go in and fix compatibilities yourself, finding individual variables that may or may not even be obvious. This type of shit is why I'm able to read code, albeit not very well and not well enough to program things myself. That being said, I wouldn't go back to that if I could. The biggest change from VX Ace to MV is that the process of adding things to your game is as simple as dragging a file from one folder to another. RPG Maker MV runs on Java. Put your coding language opinions to the side and let me show you what this does with my own personal project called Atelier Cane. The ability to load a plugin, they're called plugins now, just into your project and individually turn them off and on without needing to worry about committing to something being in the project. I recognize that this is a non-issue, but being able to have just files that sit in a folder ready to be added into a project without needing to keep a master project around with everything you'd want, or just a big text file library that you need to manually copy-paste, it's wonderful. The fact that parameters are usually right here, so easy to manage because they're tailor-built to be tweaked in the interface, it makes making games so much easier and can make things more complicated, but still super accessible. I recognize that something being plug and play can put a lot of people off, but that shouldn't stop you from doing something amazing and making something completely your own. Not to mention, they introduced a proper side view battle system like in Final Fantasy, this time allowing it to be in the vanilla game. By default, it was always just that front view battle, making you think of Dragon Quest. I mentioned this, but now the side view is 100% integrated and accounted for when it comes to that kind of thing that you want to produce. When I say accounted for, that goes for something like the character creator too. RPG Maker VX Ace had a character creation tool in it, but it was flawed and made you create these full front-facing characters, which feels a bit awkward. Though that might just be me. The character creator in MV has you create a character that's facing at an angle, but also with a lot more customization options and even, right here, the on-map sprites and the battle sprites. It's a lot easier to visualize what your character is going to be and how they look, and I love this change. The only thing I wish was in here was allowing you to draw the program itself, but that's what Photoshop is for. There's a lot to love about MV, and I mean that in every way. There's no but coming after this. If you could spend the money on an RPG Maker, I'd highly recommend MV. It's a fantastic engine because even in its vanilla form, if you only had a few plugins that gave you things like overpasses and custom splash screens, you could make your very own simple RPG. Or complex one, and it all comes down to the effort that you put in. It's genuinely insane. In the year of our Lord 2020, within the throes of COVID-19 that we are still feeling to this day, RPG Maker would release in its current final form. There are other RPG Maker games, sure, like one built in Unity or the actual most recent one, RPG Maker With, released on all major consoles. But they have a few problems. Being on console, you lose access to what makes RPG Maker, as a series now, what makes it so great. The fact that it has limitless potential if you're willing to use the tools it provides. The same could be said for all game creation engines. I mean, one of the most beloved games in the universe that was given to the freaking Pope was made in Game Maker Studio, but there's something so enticing about RPG Maker, specifically, that draws people like me in. Maybe it's the fact that you don't necessarily need to program in order to get something relatively stable and usable. Maybe it's because I play games like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest and Fire Emblem and Tactics Ogre and Shin Megami Tensei and blah blah blah, you get it. I'm an RPG fan. I want to create stories for people to experience through the form of a role-playing game. And there really isn't an easier place to start than RPG Maker MC. One of the greatest things that RPG Maker has done is look at all the shit that we try to add to it and then implement it properly. The mass amount of scripts that we injected, I feel, was the direct inspiration for switching to individual code files for RPG Maker MV to use. The region system started in VX Ace was to facilitate better encounters through a larger map. The side view battle system, in its entirety, was for those of us who preferred something just like what Final Fantasy did in its first few outings. And now, one of the most popular styles of JRPG combat is now native to RPG Maker MZ, in the form of the ATB gauge, or the real-time battle. This changes the game, not by much, but it absolutely does. The developers listened, and we just eat that shit up wholesale. I didn't mention this, but they even added TP gauges back in, I think, VX Ace or MV, I don't remember. But it's as if they understood what we really wanted. I don't speak for everyone, though, as there's still a host of people that want something different, and that's more than okay. The character creator got a bit of an upgrade, but here's something I'm sure many people wanted. So in RPG Maker games, your battle animations, hell, all of your real-ass animations, were tied to cells and were parts of a sprite map. You had to put in a fair amount of work to make your own cells, especially if you wanted them to fit an art style. And the game only runs things at 30 FPS, so you're screwed if you wanted a fancy new animation, but didn't have the chops to make one yourself. That changed in MZ, which uses custom particle effects to make their animations. The editor isn't native to RPG Maker MZ, it's a separate, open source program called Effectseer. More and more, the game is asking less and less of you to create, which is amazing for people like me who specialize in taking assets others create and turning that into separate forms of art. RPG Maker MZ is, by and large, the most accessible RPG Maker has ever been, not least of which thanks to these upgrades and even the things they brought back from the dead, like the separate mapping layer system that hasn't been in the engine since RPG Maker XP. A 15-year gap. Hey again, Future Sonata here one more time. I'm looking at the screen instead of the camera. Hello. Is it weird when I look at the camera? Maybe. I just wanted to say I missed a couple things trying to get you guys to buy RPG Maker MZ. This isn't a sponsored video, by the way. Like, I don't feel like I should have to say that it's not a sponsored video, but that's besides the point. Other things that they added were things such as auto-saving, or the revamped plugin system, the plugin command system, where you can just select from a drop-down list. Plugins have just been made so much easier, and one of my favorite things that I neglected to mention was this right here, this movement tracking system. So whenever you're making characters move and such like that, it just lets you know how it's gonna work out. You don't have to count spaces anymore like I've been doing. So yeah, please, RPG Maker MZ, it's on sale right now as I'm recording this, and it's gonna go on sale all the time. It's always on sale. Not always. You know what I mean? It goes on sale frequently enough. Buy it. Or don't. I'm not your mom. This is, sadly, where I have to start talking about the thing I originally wanted to talk about before I went down the path of history. There's a lot of issues with RPG Maker, and what I'm about to say regarding these issues isn't meant to be a deterrent, but rather a warning. If you start tinkering around with RPG Maker because of this video, and to decide you want to play around with actually producing something, you need to be aware of the pitfalls. You need to be aware of the pitfalls you can and will fall into. You will not escape. You can't. You simply have to embrace it as a beginner. Hell, embrace it as someone learning anything new, this product notwithstanding. The most prominent example I can think of is that you skip one of the more crucial steps of game development, which is making a minimum viable product. The part where you make something with as little detail as possible to sell your game and make it something worthwhile with enough polishing. You have a lot of the same assets just sitting there waiting to be used and mess around with. It's really easy to fall into thinking that whatever you're creating will just work without putting in the effort into actually testing things out, seeing what you need to change, all of that. It's like a trap, and that also comes with another thing that's going to wombo combo you. This database is a lot. It isn't always filled to the brim with entries, but depending on the version you go with, it's still going to be a whole lot. You ask yourself a question, what do I do here? Do you just go with what's already been given to you and work around that? Or do you delete nearly everything and start from scratch? A lot of people, myself included, choose the latter, and then you sit down for a long time and pick out things you want to make, all your classes, all your prospective characters, the skills they learn, status effects, all of this. It's a lot, and if you front load your time in the engine doing this stuff, you're going to hate yourself. And maybe that's my ADHD talking. I'm not a great expert in making games. I'm a piece of shit from the West Coast that lives in Phoenix, but I am saying that it's very easy to sit there and front load things that may not actually work in practice, leading once again into skipping your minimum viable product. I should say, it's not necessary to have one of these for every single project you make, but you should be sitting there and wondering what little you need to sell an idea and not throw yourself into the deep end of the pool without knowing how to swim and wondering why you're drowning. I'm really describing overchoice. When you have so many options to choose from, it's harder to make an informed decision on what you should actually do, and that's part of it, but I'm also asking that you sit down and let yourself be new. Let yourself make a mistake. Let yourself be absorbed by the creative process. It's wonderful. On that same note, you can't really get better if you don't let yourself finish things. It doesn't necessarily have to be a whole-ass released game, Lord knows I haven't done that, but you have to let yourself finish an idea. Balance an enemy encounter at a certain level, create a map and play around in it, make a whole-ass cutscene that utilizes several things that you pick up. You can't let yourself fall into the oh-so-tempting new project button when it's right there and you can pick up a fresh start with default assets. You remember when I said that I got up to like 64 projects? Yeah, I was young then, I'm still figuring things out, but that's a lot of created and scrapped projects that I made, mostly building on the same regurgitated ideas that I had been making before. Constantly wrapping myself in the best idea I could think of at the time, being disappointed in myself on not being good enough to make them in less than a month. I was torturing myself for nothing. Committing to an idea that's good, not great, not the best, not bad, not terrible, just good, is where you're going to find yourself learning. Challenging yourself with new things, new engines, new plugins, that's when you're going to be able to sit down and properly finish something. If you're looking for a sign to pick up RPG Maker, please take this as that sign. It's a fantastic series of game engines that you can find so much support for on all corners of the internet. I love RPG Maker. You just have to understand that some pitfalls are unavoidable and that you shouldn't beat yourself up over not being good enough yet. Yet. That's the key word. The wisest words about art, creating art, whether that be drawing or making a video game, came from someone very dear to me.
Dude, sucking at something is the first step towards being sorta good at something.
There's a whole lot of love poured into RPG Maker games, some you may have even heard of. The catch is that most exposure these games get are from people who do not use the combat of these games. One of the most famous examples I can think of is Yume Nikki, which was made entirely in RPG Maker 2003. Absolutely insane to think about, but it's true. Hell, Ao Oni wears an RPG Maker XP on its sleeve. Nobody would intentionally create this unless you were taking faces from the base engine and putting them onto school uniform bodies. It's insane. RPG Maker is what you make of it, and it doesn't necessarily have to include combat and boss fights and stats. It can just be a thing you use to create an experience for yourself, for friends, and for the sake of itself. RPG Maker is accessible, and you should pick one of them up if you're ever thinking about making video games specifically. You don't even have to do a commercial release or make all your own assets. Just go make games. I'm not going to sit here and be a diet pirate software. I don't have the chops, nor do I have the luscious hair. I honestly think Thor would hate this video and me in general, but I think you should listen to the guy.
Go make games.
It's not such a task that you should beat yourself up over it for not knowing everything. You can incrementally learn more and more and make and make. As an artist myself, I want to see what you make. I want to give back to a community that so graciously offers itself for others to engage with. I like making video games, man. You should too. Especially if you're a super nerd watching a video about RPG Maker. So to avoid plagiarizing people at the cost of sounding like a fucking idiot, very little research goes into videos I make like this one. I recognize that makes me sound like a moron, but for once, I actually went and tried looking up different articles about RPG Maker because it's not super niche anymore. I mean, it still kind of is, but it's not like trading pirated copies on MSN type niche, you dig? Though, this is only after this video was mostly done. Like, did you know that a fan translation of RPG Maker 95 in 2000 by a guy named Don Miguel was a major reason why RPG Maker started going absolutely insane? And it was done super illegally. ASCII, the corporation that was the rights holder for RPG Maker at the time, was super not into that and asked him to take it down, but quote some articles, it was too late. This is a classic case of stuff being encouraged to be shared, being shared. As an editor, someone who lives in a shareware medium, I'm all for sharing things around if it's for the sake of telling Adobe to go fuck themselves, or if it's for the sake of making games and software available for those without access to it. There's plenty of better sources of information detailing more details on RPG Maker's very storied history, even on games you wouldn't expect to be made in RPG Maker but are very clearly wearing the skin of an RPG Maker game, like one that sent John Eyepatchwolf into a spiral of never-ending torment. I do not like Fear and Hunger. It is not a game made for me, but I'm happy for you if you like it. I went over the history of RPG Maker as an evolving, easy to pick up and play with engine and the problems that might come with using it, not necessarily the history of as it was in the community. I didn't use these articles in the writing of this video, so there's nothing really to cite necessarily, but I've left them and the Wikipedia page that I used to get a brief overview of the series down in the description. Crediting where I got my stuff from is very important to me. Never forget that. The point of this video, if you really want to boil it down to one, is just me being a gigantic nerd talking about a program that I really love. For some reason, nerdy men talking about their niche interest gets views on this platform, so here I am leaning into it for once instead of gushing about romance anime and Kingdom Hearts. I hope you liked it, and leave a comment telling me what you thought about the video. Hit that subscribe button too, it means a lot, and I'd like to hit 1,500 subs by the end of the year, if at all possible. With all that said, my name is Sonata. Thank you for watching.